Thrilled to be here to talk to you today at the end of the day, standing between you guys and drinks. But that's okay because you're all literally between me and drinks, so we're in it together, and we're going to make it through. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about publicly available information and how you can leverage it to build out a more comprehensive and robust cyber defensive strategy. So, a couple days ago marked a very somber anniversary for our country. I'm from the United States, and 17 years ago, almost to the day, there was the probably most catastrophic terrorist attack on our soil when terrorists weaponized airplanes and flew them into several targets. And at the time, I was working for General Motors and building trucks as an engineer, so the briefing this morning from Argus was really interesting. But I was quite happy doing what I thought was great work, enjoying myself, and like many Americans on that day and the days that followed, I started to wonder why I was doing what I was doing, and was I living a life of purpose, and not just in the context of national security, but in a broader context of understanding how fragile and perishable life could be. So I started to think maybe I should do something different. And I thought for a minute about going back to school and becoming a doctor, and then I thought, geez, that would take a really long time. And oh, by the way, I don't like blood. So I thought, what else could I do? So I made a decision that at the time seemed logical to me, and I joined the Central Intelligence Agency. And, it probably wouldn't have seemed as logical to my family, but luckily I couldn't tell them what I was doing or who I was working for, so it all worked out fine. And you're all about to learn probably more about what I did than my family ever knew. So I spent 15 years working for the CIA in support of national security priorities. And in there, I led technical operations. I also did a lot of data exploitation, and most recently supported the cyber mission of the US intelligence community. And it's from that background that I come talk to you today. I have the rare pleasure now of taking that experience that I had there working on the offensive side of cyber and technical activities and transitioning that into how do we build better defenses. And I do that now in an unclassified environment, which is fantastic because I can talk more openly. One thing that struck me working for the CIA on the offensive side of cyber is how little, even within the same agencies or within the same teams, the offensive operators talked to, helped, and supported the defenders. And, I think back and I was like, why is this that we aren't more collaborative across the intelligence community, across the government, and around the world? And I like to think of it as if I were a burglar and I'm going around a neighborhood looking for a soft target, and I find a house and their window's unlocked, and rather than creeping quietly in the window, taking what I want, and creeping quietly back out the window and no one's the wiser, I pick up my phone and I call the local police department and I said, hey, did you know that this window's unlocked? You might want to call everybody in the neighborhood, let them know they need to start locking their windows, because it's a great way for someone like me to get in their house, right? It just doesn't happen, at least not generally within the security apparatus. We like to somewhat keep those two activities bifurcated. So it's fantastic to come to events like this and see more collaboration between the defensive side, learning from what are those vulnerabilities, how do we share and help each other. I really enjoyed Jamie this morning talking about ethical hacking. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. We should talk more openly like this across. So I'm going to do that today. So in traditional warfare, right, it's very similar as when we're talking about war in the cyberspace, offense or defense. There's several layers that when you're building out a defensive strategy, you need to think about. From the high-level strategic, the big questions, the operational, and then the very tactical. There's an event, and we have to do remediation. We have to take account of what the damages are. And publicly available information, I would stipulate, can build out any levels of that defensive strategy and can be leveraged for that. So before we start, just a minute on what do I define as publicly available information, or PAI. And I use that term very broadly. And that can be oftentimes when we're talking about physical defense or VIP protection or several other things that you can leverage with public data or leverage public data for, you think of social media, right? It's massive. It's huge. I think probably everyone in this room You all probably have some sort of social media account. Most of you probably multiple ones. Probably a lot of you were posting, even today, hashtag NextGenThreats, right? But there's a lot more than that, and it's growing by the day. New sites, new forums, new blogs. So PAI, to me, and the way that we define it at my company and across the community, is anything, whether not necessarily freely, can be purchased, but anything that can be publicly acquired, publicly available, unclassified data. So blogs, commercial sites, eBay, right? So e-commerce. And then also you have the deep dark web, where you can find the most creepy and niche communities, from bestiality to cryptocurrency to hacking forums, right? People talking and sharing exploits. CT, jihadi forums. More and more people are moving off of social media for those CT activities into Telegram, Google+, as well as forums within the deep dark web where they think there is anonymity. And in a lot of cases there are, but just like all humans, people are fallible and they make mistakes. And so there's things that you can do with that data. This morning, someone talked about Strava and the data, the aggregated data, to see the patterns of life of US personnel and potentially facilities overseas. That wasn't a hack. That wasn't a compromise. That was a company legally and ethically aggregating anonymous data that they had the legal right to do and then releasing that. So, any data like that, when you click your terms and conditions, which all of those users did, you agree to share that data. You make that data public by clicking that. And in this case, it was anonymized. So even under GDPR, there's not what we would call PII, or personally identifying information. They've anonymized that data, but that doesn't mean that you can't learn from it, as we saw this morning, right? Seeing the patterns of life, even with anonymous data, can reveal, in this case, classified or sensitive information. So publicly available information can be leveraged for many different uses, and what is in isolation, unclassified or not sensitive, oftentimes when aggregated, can have broader implications. When I very first joined the CIA, my first trip, I was going to, and this picture is only of the elephant, not representative where I went, but 2 colleagues and I were deploying to do an activity. And in preparation for that trip, we did extensive training. We were going to a country that not only was unfriendly to the United States from a partner service perspective, from a nation-state actor perspective, but it was also incredibly high crime. A lot of petty crime, a lot of not-so-petty crime. So we trained extensively to be aware of our surroundings, to know what to watch for, how to carry our bag so that it could be torn away, how not to carry anything of value in the bag, how to secure our items, how never to leave anything alone. So all of these things that we did in weeks and months preparing for this trip, we finally get to the country and we think, yeah, we're ready, right? So similar to what you guys do on your networks and your databases and protecting your data and your personnel, you think you've got it covered, right? Well, we get into country and we're walking on day 2 or 3 from our hotel to the embassy, and the streets are congested with people, just completely crowded. And we're walking along, and what walks next to me but an elephant, a full-grown adult elephant. And I don't know how many of you have been up close and personal with an elephant. Maybe anybody been up close to an elephant? Right? They're big, right? They're pretty freaking big. I had not been close to an elephant outside of the zoo, and they don't let you get that close because they're big. And I was like, holy crap, there's an elephant walking down a crowded, busy street, and this thing is huge. And so I turned to my colleague, I was like, Ryan, there's a freaking elephant right there. And he says, yeah, that's amazing. And we turned to the third guy, and we said, Bill, did you see how big that elephant was? And he looks at us, and he's like, what? And we said, the elephant. And he says, what elephant? So my point is that sometimes we can be so focused internally, and we can be so focused on these things that we've trained and practiced for, that we miss the elephant. We miss that big picture, the strategic, situational awareness. So not the things you train for, but the things outside of what you train for. And this is kind of how I think about publicly available information. It's near infinite. It's huge. We can't even comprehend how much data is publicly available to us that we can leverage, whether you work for government, military, or private company, whatever you happen to do, whatever walk of life you happen to be in. You can leverage that information to build out a more robust situational awareness picture for your company or for your interests. So just for an example, we monitor across the deep dark web for stolen, compromised IP, goods, fake passports, credentials, all sorts of things, because whatever your criminal hacker steals from you, he or she has to, or wants to at least, make money off of it, which means they have to have a place or a way to sell it. So if you're not looking, how do you know? Right? Maybe your monitoring software is going to tell you there's been a compromise, but maybe there's not. If it's an inside job, right? If it's somebody, like in the case, my poor country has plenty of instances that we won't go into. But if you're not looking, how do you know? And this is just a case, one of many examples, where it's like, hey, I'm selling stuff, and if you're not looking, you wouldn't know it was there. Also, from a situational awareness perspective, you can also build not only awareness of what people are trying to sell and if potentially there's IP related to your company out on the web, but it's also staying one step ahead of the game. Because every time we patch, guess what? A motivated attacker is going to find another entry vector. They just are. And so understanding what they're talking about, what they're looking to exploit, how they're sharing. Some of them like to brag. Some of them like to help each other. So this is, again, an example on the dark web of different forums that we monitor to try to stay one step ahead. And as they move, we continue watching at scale and saying who's talking about what so that we can know and then change and adapt our defense as they change and adapt their offense. So then going from the high strategic situational awareness perspective, just knowing what's out there, you can also leverage PAI for cyber investigations as an example of the operational tier of a cyber defensive strategy. And the comic is a joke here saying, look at that, the computer is the culprit, right? Well, the computer's not the culprit. It's whoever's behind that computer. And so how do you go from, I know there's a potential threat, to who is that threat? Right? Is it someone serious? Is it persistent? Is it targeted? Are they someone who's going to come after us again? How do we, again, adapt and change to protect ourselves? So just one example, this was a very, very simple, unsophisticated phishing email. I use it just to kind of talk through more of the methodology or the tradecraft of what to do when something happens. And again, it's not a computer, it's a human being. So there's breadcrumbs, there's clues that he or she is going to leave us to learn more about them, leveraging nothing but publicly available information. So what clues did this person leave us? The email address, right? The Bitcoin wallet address, as well as he's nice enough to say, hey, I'm foreign, I don't speak English very well, thanks. And what can we do with that? Well, in this case, we look through all public records, which again is purchase data, often cases, but you can learn who he is, where he lives, where he works, what's his phone number, but most importantly in this case, I got his LinkedIn account, his Facebook account, his VK account. And what did I do with that? Guess what? I fed that back into all the data that I collect on, and now I'm reading everything that he's posting on VK. I can also look for him in the dark web, which I did. And then I can look at his Bitcoin wallet address, which I also did, and find out, although it's a super unsophisticated attack preying on people's guilty consciences, I cut out a lot of it, it's kind of funny what he did, but he's super successful. Like you wouldn't know, but people are throwing money at him left and right. He's doing a great job. But you can see how in a different context, if it were something more sophisticated, how then you can know a lot more about your adversary. And again, from a defensive cyber strategy perspective, knowing who's coming after you is incredibly important so that you can know how to protect yourself and educate your employees. And finally, at the tactical level, what do you do, or how can publicly available information help you at that? We have an event, we have a loss, we have an attack, we have a compromise. How can you leverage public data in that case? I love this cartoon. I'm sure you've all seen it. It's the natural tension between the human people and then the technical people, and our way is better. But the point here is, and the two intertwine anymore, right? Regardless, technical means and human means, social engineering and technical access, they are more and more intertwining and overlapping. You know why? Because our digital lives, our virtual lives, and our physical lives are completely overlapped now. You know, my kid, I'm pretty sure he doesn't know when he's talking to a human being or just thinking Fortnite anymore because they're just overlapped. So the point is that whether a criminal or nation state, they're going to take the easiest way, and the easiest way is almost always a human being, whether human error on a technical platform or human error in person. And you don't even need the wrench, because you know what? People just give this stuff away. You know, they give it away. And 95% of all successful attacks are because of human error. Human error, whether it's a technical error, I failed to patch, whether it's a technical error, you know, I clicked the link, or whether you let the pizza guy into your server room, it's human error 95% of the time. And guess what? You cannot solve this problem with training alone. Training is a big part of it, education is a big part of it, but you just aren't going to prevent every single attack. Some of them are really stinking good. And so, again, knowing when something happens, monitoring what's happening in the public space, you can learn a lot more that sometimes a tool or a pen test isn't going to find. So, for example, one of our clients asked us to monitor across publicly available information anytime that their government agency, whatever it was, shall remain nameless to protect the guilty, is mentioned. And this was primarily for physical and for also cyber threat detection. This is a Ukrainian-based hacker, hacker forum, and he's just bragging. He's not even selling, he's bragging. What he did was he hacked, I think it was between 10 and 15 different pornography sites, and then he scraped any users' accounts of users who had used their work, and not just work, but government credentials to log in and view porn. Now, I hear the collective groan, right? Why would someone do that? Guess what? Guess what's the one account your spouse does not have access to? Right? So these guys think they're being smart. Now they're not so smart because all of you know what they did. But again, these are credentials. This could be your sysadmin. This could be somebody with keys to your kingdom, and they are using their work credentials to log in and view pornography, one of the most porous sites you can go to on the web. And as this guy pointed out, look what I did. It was super easy. And it was. It was probably super easy. But just by monitoring, then we can say, hey, we might want to have folks change their passwords, right? And it's not about getting them in trouble for doing what they did, even though it was incredibly stupid. It's about taking remediation measures after this has occurred. And oh, by the way, the impact is not just into the credentials they put out. It's that they're reusing this password. And if this weren't work email, they're reusing that username, right? How many of you have the same username on VK as you have on LinkedIn, as you have on Facebook, as you have on Twitter, right? You have the same handle. And so we see the same thing with personal email addresses across social media accounts. So once you get one vector, all of a sudden you've opened up the door. And then I can see who they're talking to, and I can see who they're working with. And then I blow out their network, and I can collect everything about these guys. So, as I said, one, most people reuse their passwords. So one compromise, one stolen credential actually equals many stolen credentials. And two, just to put it into context, there are currently 1.4 billion credentials for sale. And that's not counting my Ukrainian friend who does it for free and just puts them out there. Hey, anybody want these? Right? Those are for sale. They're pennies. They're pennies. You want some credentials to almost any company worldwide, you name it, look in the dark web, and you can probably find some for sale for 25 cents, $1. It depends. Like government ones are worth more money, by the way. So in conclusion, and then we can all go get drinks and you can ask me questions over a glass of wine, hopefully. Social media is enormous, and it presents a wealth of information. There are close to 2.5 billion active social media accounts. And these, by the way, are people who measure their success and popularity by how many likes, how many reads, how many shares they want to be heard. It is amazing what people will post publicly on the internet, and then forget about the dark web where they think they have anonymity. And oh, by the way, Sweden, you guys are overachievers. You have over 6 million active social media accounts here, which based on population, you're at like 2/3 or plus for social media usage. It's huge. To ignore that much data and that wealth of a data source when we're talking about cyber, it just doesn't make sense. This is digital data, and it's out there, and people want it to be seen. And it can be factored into all levels of strategy, from the high level, just situational awareness, to operational, all the way to tactical. It can build in and build a more robust strategy across the board. So I will conclude at that and say, the data that's out there, to ignore it, the publicly available information, would be like ignoring the elephant. It's probably too much to go through manually. It's more than advanced Google searches in the morning. It's persistent monitoring. It's alerting, just like you do on your networks. And understanding the data landscape on the outside of our borders is just as important and critical as securing and understanding the data landscape and the activity within our borders. So with that, that's what I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dare. Thank you. Question. So a reflection is like we react quite strongly to ordinary crimes because we see the actual people who commit these crimes, while lots of stuff on the net, it feels like it's so abstract. It's someone over there doing something that we can't really, we can't even identify who it is. So I think one really important thing with these conferences, like we saw with Peter Kruse, also is like we see the actual people who commit these crimes and make it more tangible. So my question is like, do you agree, and how can we work with this to actually make this a more like a tangible threat?
No, I think that's absolutely true. And actually, I think that living in a world where we explore this data so much, it does dehumanize people. There's things we will say and do online that we would never do in our human interpersonal lives. But when it comes to cybercrime and moving of stolen goods, it's every bit as damaging, if not more damaging, than stealing something from someone's home and taking it to the black market and selling it on the street, right? Or trying to move it at a pawn shop. Because people feel the anonymity, and because it can proliferate a lot farther, a lot quicker. So I think we should feel just as violated if someone takes our IP, if you're financially motivated, or takes data from us, as we would in the case where someone enters our window and breaks into our home. I'm just not sure we're quite there yet. And sometimes, and I have no idea what Johanna said, but I saw the man with the head in the sand, like not knowing that someone's moving your IP on the dark web.
Yeah.
Right? And pretending like it's not happening is probably worse than at least knowing that you've been violated and then taking actions to mitigate and clean up the mess.
Yeah. So one last raise your hand question. How many have explored the dark web in any way? Maybe 10? Yeah, okay. So you know what you're going to do this weekend, right? Yep.
Oh, prepare
Good study,
to be
study.
prepare to see the nasty underbelly of human society.
Any questions for Dare? Yes? How do we teach our children to be more careful?
So it's funny, we have certain data sets that we'll show customers, and they're not worried about the kids, they're worried about themselves. They're like, what do I do? And I say, go back and get a flip phone. Like, put away all of the iPhone, all of the technology. I worry a lot about my kids. I don't let them be on electronics if I'm not at the house. I don't trust anyone. Companies are pretty financially motivated. They'll look at what's happening in their chat rooms to protect themselves. It's kind of sad. I wish it were more to protect our children, but there are measures that most companies have in place to prevent nefarious activities.
All right. Anyone else? Questions? No? All right. Once again, applaud Dare King. Thank you very much.
Thanks.